Again, another loaded division, and I think there are legitimate reasons for optimism and legitimate questions for every single team in this division. Every single one of these teams thinks they're going to make the playoffs here. So let's jump right into it. Start off with the 49ers. You know, they have been the blue blood team in the division until last year, where they had their season from hell. Not starting off great, this offseason with some news here and that. We got Juwan Jennings at the teasing the holdout there. Let's start off with you, Kelley. Great schedule. Some questions at key personnel positions there. What do you do with the 49ers this year?
Yeah, this is tough. Do I expect them to be right near the top again? Yes, I do. Do I think that we're going to get Christian McCaffrey looking a lot more like he has a couple years ago than what he struggled through for the past, calendar year at this point, with everything with the knee? Yeah, I think he looks a little bit better. But, we got to be honest, with skill position guys as a whole, and even include, I'll throw Nick Bosa in there, and Trent Williams as well. Everybody's getting a little older, right? And that's going to happen. And Father Time's going to catch up. When does that happen? And I expect this division to be extremely competitive. Niners are right there at the top for me. I don't expect them to go away. I think we're still talking about them in the playoffs. This is one of those where I think an interesting, not only the easiest schedule, some interesting schedule notes, though. A really good chance to open up the season strong. So if you're looking to fade the Niners, maybe wait till we get into the season. They are at Seattle, at New Orleans, home against Arizona, home against Jacksonville. We could be talking 3-1 or 4-0 out of the gates. They also end the season with a pretty weak schedule as well. So I know when we're talking about teams to bet on, we go through schedule notes. Those are kind of beginning and end of season is where I like to look at first. So that jumped off the page to me as well. This is, like we've talked about with a couple of these teams. How much do you believe in Brock Purdy? A couple of these teams we've talked about this week. I think Brock Purdy, look, we could all argue about if he was overpaid or not. I think the guy's a gunslinger. I think we saw a little bit more out of that with him last year, with dealing with some of the injuries that he was forced to improvise a little bit more, or sometimes other times didn't. But with him being kind of labeled as this system quarterback for much of the beginning of his career, I liked seeing that last year. I think you're going to get a more confident Brock Purdy this year. And I think that could lead the Niners to pretty high heights here in the NFC.
Nick, fantasy note real quick. Christian McCaffrey, are you willing to draft him in the first round knowing the risks?
Jeff, if you would have asked me that a month ago, I would have said no way. I've had a come to Jesus moment on Christian McCaffrey. I think I'm back in. I'm talking myself into one more elite season. And, part of it is this idea that, everything went wrong last year for the 49ers. The luck factor will probably come back around this year. Obviously, the schedule, as we keep talking about, sets up really well for them. It just comes down to health for CMC. It's 100% a bet on his health, and maybe to a lesser degree a bet on Trent Williams' health, because we know the splits for that offensive line when he's out of the lineup. It's hard for me to pass on Christian McCaffrey, Jeff, especially if he's still lingering on the board at the end of round one, because at that point you're getting into some territory where it's like, yeah, you could go Ashton Genty, you could go Derrick Henry. There's some of those tier 2 wide receivers available, but none of those guys to me have a chance to finish as the 1-1 overall, like Christian McCaffrey could and has done multiple times in the past. So it depends on your risk tolerance in fantasy. But look, if you're playing in a league that includes an overall contest where you got multiple leagues all competing for a high money prize, those are the type of leagues where I'm willing to go all in on CMC because I'm shooting for upside.
All right, very good. 10.5 is the win total there. We'll just say one more thing real quick. A lot of young defensive players getting their shot this year, including Michael Williams, obviously their first-round pick. Whether these guys step in, Alfred Collins, who's unsigned right now, how much can he contribute right away? That's going to be a big deal there. All right, let's hit the Rams. Nick, we'll start with you this time. Big drama this offseason. Will Stafford stay or will he go? Turns out he's staying. He got his contract. They added Davante Adams. How much of an upgrade is Adams from Cooper Kupp? I think there's a lot of optimism on this Rams team. I think there's also a lot of volatility.
I think so. I fall more in the optimistic camp, and you do bring up a good point. We were not that far removed from thinking that Matthew Stafford might either retire or be playing for another team. We're also not that far removed from Sean McVay thinking about walking away from this team, and it now feels like they've kind of regathered that momentum that they had built up early in the decade, obviously winning that Super Bowl. And a lot of that, Jeff, is the improvement on the defensive side. I think it's fun to talk about Kyron Williams in fantasy and Davante Adams pairing up with Puka Nacua. But I think what really changed for this team and what really pushed them into the postseason, and by the way, they almost won that game in Philadelphia. I think if it's not like sleeting in that game, the Rams probably pull it out. The additions of Braden Fisk and Jared Verse in the draft last year, both of those look like big time hits. And the Rams had been this top heavy roster for so long. They badly needed an infusion of talent on defense. So I feel so much better about this defense going into this season than I do last season. To answer your Davante Adams question, look, if I have concerns about Cooper Kupp and his age and his production at this point in his career, I think it's fair to say that you have to ask the same questions about Davante Adams. But I mean, he's almost in like Derrick Henry territory for me, where I want to see him fall off before I believe that it's going to happen, right? He's such a physical freak. I think he's the perfect fit with Matthew Stafford, who was one of the most inefficient quarterbacks in the NFL last season, guys, in the red zone, was completing about 46% of his passes in the red zone. Davante Adams is the perfect guy, I think, to mend that. So I like Davante Adams this year for fantasy purposes. I think you can get his over-under 7.5 touchdowns over at the DK Sportsbook. I would look at the over on that. One more note on the Rams, guys. We're talking about the schedule for the 49ers. To break the tie for me in this division, I think it really is that schedule. You look at the out-of-division games. Both teams, of course, play the NFC South and the AFC South. You feel good about that. But those rotational games, the Rams, first place last year, they get Detroit, Philly, and Baltimore. 2 of those 3 games are on the road. San Francisco, by virtue of finishing 4th last year, gets the Bears, the Giants, and the Cleveland Browns instead.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. Kelley, real quick, would you bet the Rams to win the division? I'm
getting very close to it. It is a good chance I will have that bet. We talked about it earlier in the week. I have a Stafford MVP bet, so I think it's a loaded division. So I don't know how I am going to end up betting the Rams, but there will be some team bets for me, whether it's division over their win total. I just haven't settled on exactly what I want to play yet, but I will be there. Agree with a lot of what Nick just said. Another scheduling note just to add on there. They will, I mean, no surprise here. This happens with a lot of the West Coast teams, only behind the Chargers in distance traveled during the season for them.
Absolutely. The next thing we're going to talk about always leads among the leaders in distance travel by virtue of their location. The Seattle Seahawks. I always love it when they play like Miami or some Florida team. You get the longest trip in football, but they made some weird trips this offseason, just metaphorically, I guess. Trading away Geno Smith, trading away DK Metcalf, getting rid of the last vestiges of the Pete Carroll era. I question some of the things they did this offseason, Kelley. Where are you on the Seahawks going this year? Win total at 8.5. I think divisional odds are plus 475. Any opinions on them? Yeah,
very low on the Seahawks this year, Jeff. You just broke it down very well. This is a team I was very excited about to see what they could do last year. We talked about it a little bit earlier. I still don't know how good or bad of a football team they were because I felt like that offensive line held them back so much. And I don't really know that we should be super confident that that's going to be all that much better this year. I think it's going to be tough for it to be much worse. You got an offensive coordinator change. I don't really know that I'm sold that Sam Darnold is definitely a better quarterback than Geno Smith. I know there was a lot of it. He was great there in Minnesota at the beginning of the season, trailed off a little bit. Just long-term Sam Darnold view, I don't really know that it's a huge upgrade there in Seattle. Look, the secondary is awesome. I think the defensive line, you've got some quality play there, but what can this offense do? I've got major concerns there. I do have a bet on the Seahawks. It is for them to finish 4th, or also known as last, in this division at plus 120. We brought that up earlier about the Raiders at minus 175, getting plus money on the Seahawks. I've got all 3 other teams in this division well ahead of them.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I've given out the Seahawks under 8.5 already. So I'm in lockstep with you on that one there. They got younger and cheaper with Darnold, but not by much. They did get a 2nd-round pick for their efforts there. And, I think the question for them is how tough is this Mike McDonald defense in year 2? I think they're banking on that. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be good enough because I think the offense is still going to be very disappointing. Nick, let's move on to the Arizona Cardinals. They're also, win total is also set at 8.5. They spent a lot of their capital, almost all their draft capital, on defense. They didn't go out and invest much in free agency. In fact, that wide receiver room is basically the same. And I think that might be one of the starting points there. You know, especially in the fantasy circles, we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. and how we expected more last year. Are you in on Kyler? Are you in on the Cardinals? What say you?
I'm not in on this team. No, I will say I'm really intrigued by the improvements they made to a defense that I thought already overachieved last season. And you look at some of the season-long numbers, and it's not like this was a top 5, top 10 defense in the NFL. But I challenge you, if you're a casual NFL fan, to name any player on the Arizona defense last year. And they not only made a few additions in free agency, but spent their first 5 picks in the 2025 NFL draft on the defensive side of the ball. So I think that is their path to hanging in games, hanging in this NFC West race. But as you alluded to, Jeff, I don't trust the offense. Nothing has really changed on that side. You and I were both out on James Conner. We're both out on Kyler Murray for fantasy purposes. There's nobody that you really trust in this receiving core outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. So I think that defense could take a step forward. I don't think the offense is at a level where I consider them a real contender for the NFC West. Kelley, I know you're going back and forth on the 49ers versus the Rams to win this division. Sounds like maybe even Arizona could sneak into that mix for you. Niners are plus 150 to win the NFC West, but here's what we're going to throw you. How about they finish second? The Niners to finish second in the division, plus 230. Are you playing that?
Okay, I'm going to say play it, but I'm going to play it a little bit differently than this exact prop.
Okay.
I like the Rams. I like the Niners at the top. So we're looking at DraftKings Sportsbook for this prop. There's other markets that you can shop around. How about the division dual forecast market, which is basically finish 1-2 in any order? I can get 49ers Rams there for 2-1. So I'm only losing 30 cents on that just to bring it down to plus 200, and then it doesn't matter the order if it goes Rams 49ers or 49ers Rams. So I like that. I think the other way, if you're even more bullish on the Rams than I am, you could go the exact finish of Rams 1, 49ers 2. That pays out plus 550. So I think I'd probably would mess around with those two before I went with this, but I'll say play it as far as they finish second.
Jeff, we'll kick it over to you for the LA Rams. The Rams to lose in the conference championship game, plus 850. And I will tell you, the Rams to win the NFC championship game is 11-1. So do you like the Rams to get there and lose at plus 850?
I'm passing on this one here. It's an interesting payout there, but I just think I'm not a horse player. I don't play exactas. And I think this is just way too specific for me at this price. First of all, the Rams pretty much have to win the division, I think, to get this there. I don't see the Rams going on the road as a wild card, getting to the conference championship game. I know what happened with the Commanders as a wild card. It can happen. Just look at all the teams in the NFC North that are really good. I think that their division is really good. I like the Rams. I think there's a chance they can win the division, but you got to factor in that right then and there, those odds to win the division. I think this is very similar. Wait to bet it in the game itself. Maybe wait to see the playoffs. I wouldn't bet this ahead of time there.
Another interesting one here, Kelley. We're looking at regular season total points scored for the Seattle Seahawks. The number comes in at 389.5. So play it or pass. The over on 389.5 total points, getting that at plus 100.
On the points total for the season, I did bet over on the Cowboys. This will be a complete pass on the Seahawks, and another one where maybe I'm a little bit more interested in the under. They didn't get to this mark a year ago, and I think I've got more questions about what the offense looks like this season than I did last season. You still got offensive line concerns. You lose a DK Metcalf. Quarterbacks, you can sit here and argue with me all day. You like Sam Darnold better than Geno Smith. I think it's a little bit of a wash. So this would be complete pass. If anything, look to the under.
The Arizona Cardinals to sweep the Seattle Seahawks in their 2 matchups this season. Now, Cardinals lost to Seattle twice in 3 weeks last year coming out of the bye. We forget there was a time when Arizona was in control of the NFC West. But, Jeff, Cardinals to reverse that trend, go 2-0 against Seattle this year, plus 225.
You look at the Cardinals' history, it's kind of weird against the Seahawks there. We had the memorable DK running down Budda Baker game. Remember that one there? We had last year where the Cardinals look like they're in their driver's seat for the NFC West and then just collapse down the stretch, spurred by that loss to the Seahawks there. I'm going to pass it just because I don't trust. When you don't trust either organization, don't bet affirmatively on anything. I think it's a stay away, if anything. I distrust both teams. So I'm just going to say pass it there. It's a fair price. I think the Cardinals are better than the Seahawks, but I'm not enough to bet it.